If the United States already failed to defeat Iran during the 40-day air campaign, why are officials now encouraging Trump to restart the war? And what makes them believe a second attempt would end differently?
If we go after critical infrastructure inside of Iran, which is consistent with what General Kellogg is advocating, they're going to strike at critical infrastructure in the Gulf. And that is going to have devastating consequences, not only for the Gulf, but for the world economy. And probably the Red Sea will get shut down as well as the Gulf. The fact is that the Iranians have a second strike capability. And if you go up the escalation ladder, it looks to me like the Iranians win, not us. And again, that's one of the reasons, just one of the reasons that we quit the air war after 40 days. And, just to go to the blockade and marry the blockade to the air war, both of those campaigns, the air campaign and the naval campaign, were predicated on the assumption that you could punish Iran and the Iranians would throw up their hands. It should be manifestly clear to General Kellogg at this point in time that Iran can absorb enormous amounts of punishment. And we do not have the capability to bring them to their knees. It's just not going to happen. If they have to eat grass, they'll eat grass. They're not going to surrender.
And this is the question Washington still has not answered. The first air campaign was supposed to weaken Iran enough to force its leaders into accepting American demands. But after 40 days of bombing, Iran's government remained in power, its missile forces were still capable of responding, and the United States agreed to stop the campaign without achieving a decisive military victory. But before discussing another military campaign, we first have to understand why negotiations are collapsing. Iran signed a memorandum of understanding with the United States, but Tehran now believes Washington has violated several major parts of that agreement. So, from the Iranian perspective, what exactly did the United States fail to honor, and why has that strengthened the hardliners inside Iran?
Remember here that there are sort of three big problems from the Iranian point of view in terms of the West living up to the Memorandum of Understanding. What we have been talking about now is the whole question of control of the Strait of Hormuz. And the issue here is that the United States thinks that some tankers or some ships can go through the Omani Channel in the Strait. And the Iranians say that is absolutely unacceptable. And this is what the two tit-for-tats have been all about, the two tit-for-tats that have taken place since the Memorandum of Understanding was signed. It's all about the question of whether or not ships can go through the Omani Channel. That's the issue. That's one big issue regarding the MOU. There are two other issues as well. One of them is that the United States has now said that it is not going to allow Iran to sell oil in world markets. And that was part of the Memorandum of Understanding. And you remember, as soon as the memorandum was signed, the Iranians were allowed, without penalty, to sell oil in world markets. The United States has now reneged on that element of the agreement. Furthermore, in the Memorandum of Understanding, this was the very first point, it was made clear that the Israelis had to cease and desist from their war against Hezbollah. And that, of course, meant getting out of southern Lebanon. And not only have the Israelis not gotten out of southern Lebanon, but they've continued their war against Hezbollah. So when you look at what's happening from an Iranian point of view, there are actually three elements in the Memorandum of Understanding where the Iranians believe that the United States has not lived up to its part of the bargain. And given that, coupled with the horrendous things that President Trump says about the Iranian leaders and the Iranian people, and given the fact that he's threatened to wipe them off the face of the earth, it's hard to see how you're going to get any cooperation in the near future from the Iranians that works to America's advantage. They have a power.
This is the foundation of Iran's current position. And that matters because every broken commitment makes future negotiations more difficult. Iranian officials now have less political room to compromise, while those calling for a tougher response have gained more influence. And at the same moment that trust is collapsing, President Trump is declaring that the ceasefire is over. President Trump then announced that the ceasefire was over while claiming Iran had asked the United States to continue negotiations. But if Tehran believes Washington has already abandoned the agreement, what would another round of attacks accomplish? Would Iran return to the negotiating table or respond by putting even more pressure on shipping through the Strait of Hormuz?
And there is no theory of victory here. Nobody can explain has an ending that works to our advantage. We signed the memorandum of understanding on June 17th because it was the best deal we could get. Yes, it was basically a surrender document, but that's because we lost the war. We have no military option here. Doing more tit for tat doesn't solve anything. And furthermore, this is, I think, a very important part of the story, Danny. Because the Iranians have been consumed with the funeral, they have not really said much about how they are going to respond to what President Trump has just done. In other words, I said before, the war in southern Lebanon has not ended. The Israelis have not pulled out. The Iranians are no longer able to sell oil on world markets. And the United States continues to insist that ships can go through the Omani Channel. Okay? So if you're the Iranians, what do you do when you hear that? They're not going to cave. We know that. They're going to play hardball. Are they going to really limit how much comes out of the Gulf? Are they going to shut the Gulf down altogether? Are they going to mine the Omani Channel? What exactly are they going to do? It's very hard to say. And then what are we going to do in response? I don't think President Trump wants a situation where the Gulf gets shut down again, or the number of ships coming out is reduced to single digits. That is not in America's interest at this point in time. It's certainly not in President Trump's political interest. But I'm not sure what he's thinking, because it's just very hard to understand what the administration is doing here. And furthermore, just one final point on this point by Trump that the Iranians have asked him to go back to negotiations and that he's kindly agreed to do that is ludicrous, right? There's no evidence of that. If anything, the Iranians are hinting, and I underline the word hinting, that they're not interested in going back to negotiations at the time. And it looks like the Pakistanis and the Omanis are working overtime to change their mind on that. But the idea that they called up President Trump and said, please, let's go back to negotiations is kind of a laughable argument.
This would place President Trump between two competing allies and adversaries. Iran could refuse nuclear negotiations and continue restricting Gulf shipping until Israel withdraws from southern Lebanon. Israel, meanwhile, could refuse to leave, arguing that its military presence is necessary to prevent Hezbollah from rebuilding its forces near the border. That means Washington may no longer be able to treat the Iran war, the Strait of Hormuz, and southern Lebanon as separate crises. For Tehran, they are becoming parts of the same negotiation. Iran's message is that the United States cannot demand Iranian concessions on nuclear enrichment, oil exports, and Gulf shipping, while allowing Israel to ignore the parts of the agreement that affect Lebanon. This gives Iran a powerful negotiating position because Trump may need Israeli cooperation to restore stability in the Gulf, but Netanyahu may calculate that withdrawing from southern Lebanon would appear to reward Iranian pressure and strengthen Hezbollah. If neither side backs down, Washington could find itself unable to reopen negotiations, unable to fully restore Gulf shipping, and unable to force Israel to comply. And while this confrontation remains unresolved, Israel is also directing more attention toward another regional power. While the conflicts involving Iran, Gaza, Syria, and Lebanon remain unresolved, Israeli officials are increasingly describing Turkey as their next major strategic threat. But Turkey is a NATO member, and President Trump has been trying to improve his relationship with President Erdogan. So, why would Israel deliberately open another confrontation? And how could that damage its relationship with Washington?
If the Iranians insist that they will not negotiate until the Israelis are out of southern Lebanon, the question is, what does President Trump do at that point in time? Let's assume, and we're just assuming here because we don't know exactly what the Iranians are going to do, but let's assume that the Iranians effectively shut down the strait, that the number of ships going out is very small on a daily basis. And at the same time, they say they will not go back to negotiations. There'll be no negotiations until the Israelis are out of southern Lebanon. Then the question is, what is President Trump going to do? Is he just going to say, okay, the status quo is fine and we'll just continue like this? I don't think so. I don't think he can do that. And I think he will go to great lengths to put pressure on the Israelis to get out. Now, whether he succeeds at that remains to be seen. But if he doesn't succeed, the question is, where does that leave the United States? And it leaves us in deep trouble.
Iran is now reportedly tying every major issue together. Tehran is saying there will be no nuclear agreement unless Israel leaves southern Lebanon. The war against Hezbollah ends, and the United States respects Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz. Is this simply diplomatic bluster, or has Iran genuinely decided that Washington must honor the entire agreement before negotiations can continue?
Well, it's, in my opinion, hard to believe that the Israelis are now picking a fight with the Turks. You would think that they have their hands full in Gaza, on the West Bank, in Syria, and in Lebanon, not to mention Iran. In my opinion, they've suffered a humiliating, the Israelis have suffered a humiliating defeat in Iran. And you want to remember here, Danny, that the most important issue from the Israeli point of view has always been Iran's nuclear capability. And if we don't get negotiations going, we're never going to get a nuclear deal, a new version of the JCPOA. And who knows what the Iranians will do on the nuclear front. So the Israelis have lost in Iran in a really serious way. And as we were just talking about earlier on the show, there's no way to rescue the situation, right? The best that you can hope for is a revised JCPOA. But it's not clear you're even going to get that at this point in time, given where we're going. So again, Iran, Gaza, the West Bank, Syria, Lebanon, and here they are putting their gun sights on Turkey and alienating the Turks. And furthermore, this has consequences for the U.S.-Israeli relationship. The U.S.-Israeli relationship in the sense that President Trump was just in Istanbul, making it very clear that the principal reason he was there was because of Erdogan, who he considers a good friend. And he talked about giving the Turks F-35s. So what Trump is trying to do is improve relations with Turkey. And at the same time, Netanyahu's picking a fight with Turkey, which is going to put Trump in a terribly awkward position. And the question is, if you're Donald Trump, do you need that? And the answer is no. The Israelis won't cooperate on southern Lebanon. They won't cooperate on Gaza. They won't cooperate on the West Bank. They won't cooperate on Iran, and so forth and so on. And now you're picking a fight with Turkey, which is going to complicate Trump's diplomacy with Turkey. This is not good from Israel's point of view, but it's where Israel is at this point in time.
Many people still believe that America has won every war it has fought because of its overwhelming military power. But when we look at Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, and now the confrontation with Iran, is that belief actually supported by history? Or has Washington repeatedly mistaken military destruction for real victory?
I don't think it's just bluster. And there's all sorts of evidence that the Iranians have said that on the internet, but I've not seen it in the Western press. And as you know, Danny, one of the big problems that we face is evaluating what's true and what's not true. And when you see reports that the Iranians have said what Professor Morandi said is their position, you're never completely sure whether it's true or not. My sense is that it is true that the Iranians have reached a point where they will not cut a deal on the nuclear issue. In fact, I think the Iranians will not continue to negotiate, period, until the Israelis are out of southern Lebanon. And there has to be some sort of agreement also, just to go back to the clip you played, on the whole question of the Omani Channel in the Gulf. I actually thought it was basically solved after the last tit for tat, not the one that just took place, the one that took place between June 26th and June 28th. I thought after that one was over with, we understood that the memorandum of understanding made it clear that Iraq controls the strait and we can't send ships. That Iran, controls the strait, and we can't send ships through.
That's what we signed.
That's what we signed. Yeah. If you look at Article 5, it seems clear to me that that's what we signed. And after the previous tit for tat, this is the June 26th to June 28th one, which was over this issue. It looked like once that tit for tat stopped that we had resolved this issue. But then it started again because we sent more ships to the Omani Channel. And they, of course, attacked the ships. And then we started the tit for tat. So you say to yourself, where are we now? Are we going to, in a week's time, send more ships or encourage more ships to go through the Omani Channel? And then we're back to square one. And I think, again, what's going to happen here, and maybe it has happened here, if Professor Morandi is correct, is that the Iranians have decided that you either respect the memorandum of understanding in all its dimensions, or if you don't, we don't agree to negotiate.
And that is the central reality Washington continues to avoid. The United States has already tested air power, economic pressure, and a naval blockade. None of them forced Iran to surrender. Iran survived the bombing campaign, retained the ability to strike back, and used its control over the Strait of Hormuz to create economic pressure far beyond the battlefield. At the same time, the United States consumed valuable Tomahawk missiles, air defense interceptors, and other weapons that cannot be replaced immediately. Restarting the war would therefore not begin from the same position as the first campaign. American stockpiles would be under greater pressure. Iran would be more prepared for another attack. Gulf infrastructure would remain exposed, and Tehran would have even fewer reasons to trust negotiations once the fighting stopped. The greatest danger is not simply that another military campaign could fail. It is that escalation could spread from Iran into the Gulf, the Red Sea, southern Lebanon, and other parts of the region, while sending energy prices higher and placing the global economy under enormous pressure. Washington may still possess the power to inflict tremendous damage on Iran, but destroying targets is not the same thing as winning a war. Until American officials can explain how bombing forces Iran to surrender, how they will prevent retaliation across the Gulf, and how the conflict ends on favorable terms, they do not have a strategy. They only have another plan to attack.
Point that the United States has lost all these wars is correct. I think about this all the time. I was in the American military from 1965 to 1975, which amazingly was coterminous with the Vietnam War. And we suffered a devastating defeat in the Vietnam War. And we have suffered significant defeats in almost every war except the first Gulf War in 1991 since then. It's really quite remarkable how bad our track record. But nevertheless, losing those wars has not mattered very much for our position in the world. And I think you were getting at this, Giannis. In fact, to the Vietnam War, we suffered this catastrophic defeat in 1975. The North Vietnamese win a decisive victory. The Americans are humiliated. 14 years later, the Cold War ends, and then the Soviet Union collapses, and we enter the unipolar moment where the United States is Godzilla. It's quite remarkable. The Vietnam War had hardly any effect at all. And most of those other, if not all of those other defeats, hardly mattered at all for our position in the world. So the question is, what's going on here? And here's how I think about it. I think that I'm a structuralist, and what I care about is power. And I'm concerned with how powerful the United States is, how powerful China is, what the relative balance of power is between them, and so forth and so on. And the point I would make is that when you think about power, what you want to look at is the population size of a country and how much wealth it has. And when you talk about wealth, what's embedded in that is where it is in terms of developing sophisticated technologies. Excuse me. And the United States has been, for a long time, and still is, a remarkably powerful country. And it promises to be a remarkably powerful country for the future because it is so wealthy and it has such a large population. Of course, the same is true of China as well. I don't want to take away from the Chinese on this front. But losing in the Gulf is not going to affect how powerful the United States is. What has happened here has much more to do with our ability to project power. You can have power, but power by itself doesn't tell you very much. This is why we lose all these wars. The question viewers should be asking is, if John says the United States is so powerful, why does it lose all these wars? And the point is that there are real limits to what you can do with all that power. And one of the problems with American policymakers is they have no sense of the limits of military power. They think because we have this giant hammer, we can run around the world and either coerce people or beat them into submission. And the truth is you can't do that. There are real limits to what you can do with military power, as we have found out on countless occasions. So when I look at the Gulf War, when I look at the Iran war, I think Giannis is exactly right that this has fundamentally altered our ability to project power into the Persian Gulf. It's destroyed our basing structure in the region, and it's done enormous damage to our alliance structure in the Gulf region. So the war has had huge consequences, but the basic power of the United States has not changed at all. We are as powerful as ever, and therefore as dangerous as ever. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Giannis.